Hey everyone, in this video we are going to talk about NeoPixel LEDs. And this video is really going to be all about having fun with lights. So I know a lot of you have probably seen, those fancy LED strips that people put in their rooms, or, they like to have these fancy patterns that maybe you put behind your desk, or you put on your ceiling, whatever it may be, right? I know some cars too, some of the fancier cars, they have some interior lighting that you can control and change the color, change the brightness, give it a pattern, whatever it may be, right? So today we're going to talk about sort of a subset of those lights called a NeoPixel ring, and we're going to be working with that and just sort of see how it differs from our normal LED control and give us an idea of some more advanced code writing. That's going to be sort of the main idea. It's the wiring, kind of simple for this, but the code not so much. So that's going to be the main emphasis of this. So you might be wondering, well, what is it, right? So it's a cool LED light ring, right? Where each LED on the ring can be set to any color. So if you notice on this NeoPixel, right, there are 12 total LEDs, right? You can count them. And the thing you want to observe is that each LED here, right? So this is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, etc., right? You can set that to any color and any intensity, okay? That's the main idea. It has its own separate power source, and what I mean by that is there is a power line that you have to give to it from the Arduino 5-volt line. And it just looks really cool. That's pretty much it. So why a lesson on fancy LEDs? And I kind of alluded to this earlier. But basically, NeoPixels have their own baby Arduino. It's basically, we're going to be using LED drivers to interface with that, right? So this baby Arduino is used to control the LEDs based on the signals received by your Arduino. But why, right? Like, why do we need this, baby Arduino, this own microcontroller for the LEDs? Well, these LEDs can be controlled across the entire range of RGB, right? So RGB are the values of red, green, and blue between 0 and 255. So if you Google the word color picker, you'll end up with something like this, right? And so we're going to focus on this here. But basically, it's a value from 0 to 255, the RGB scale. It's a value from 0 to 255 for each of the colors, red, green, and blue, right? So for this color green, right, I have 50 counts of red, 168 counts of green, and 82 counts of blue. As I slide, you can see I can change that, right? So if I wanted full red, right, so we can drag this here, come on. Okay. Let's just type it in. So if I made this 255, 0, 0, and I apologize if I said 250 earlier, it's 255. So 255, 0, 0 is pure red, right? And then if I do 0, 255, that's pure green. And if I did 0, 0, 255, that's pure blue, all right? And so you get different colors by changing the proportions of red, green, and blue, right? Changing the amount, right? So I can go ahead and slide. You can see I'm changing the amount of red, green, and blue that I introduced, right? So that's how you basically make different colors, right? That's RGB is usually the standard for, I guess, colors on screens. Is a good way of thinking about it. There are also other standards that you'll see here, like hex, HSV is a popular one, and there are other games and toys. But these are kind of the different color standards that we use. Hex is also very common. You'll see that used a lot. But we're going to be working with RGB, all right? And so the idea is that you can control the RG and B levels of the LED independently, right? You can also vary the brightness on your LED. And then each LED is what we call individually addressable. So what that means is you can control each LED on its own. So if there are 12 LEDs, right, you can set an individual color and brightness to each LED. You can also turn each LED on and off specifically, right? So if you remember way back when we talked about series and parallel wiring with LEDs, right? The main idea behind that was that all the LEDs had to turn on at the same time, right? There was no okay, I can stop one in the middle and then continue the rest, right? I mean, not like intentionally, right? Unless you, sort of just removed a resistor or a wire here or there, maybe you could get it to work. But the main idea, right, was that once you turned on that power source, all the LEDs turned on, right? Here, however, it's a little bit different. With code, we can turn LEDs on and off and change the colors and change the brightness. So this makes it actually really easy in terms of code, but not super easy as compared to what we're used to. I'll talk about that in a second. But having this baby Arduino, right, this microcontroller, means that your Arduino only has to command a color, And then the controller is responsible for handling all the complicated bits about setting the specific color and brightness. So all this stuff about like, turning on that LED, working with all of that, we don't have to worry about it. We can just set the color and turn on the LED, and that's all we have to do in code. All right. So there's going to be no digital write is the main idea. Another thing is that you can make some cool patterns with some slightly more advanced code, and then coding them, right? This is the big change. Coding them is going to use something called a library. So what exactly is a library? Well, a library is something that makes it easier to write code for trickier components like this LED ring, right? Because as we know, this LED ring has this discrete controller on it, right? But we don't really, like, off the top of our heads, like, there's no intuitive way that we can think of to write code for that controller, at least not immediately, right? So instead of trying to deal with all of that, interface with all of that, we can use something called a library, which basically has all this code written out for us already that lets us interface it. And so all we have to do then is just turn on the LED at a specific color, specific brightness, and which one we want to turn on. We can pick which one. So here's what the libraries in particular have. They have functions or methods, if you're from Java, that you can use that make it easier to do something. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to turn on my LED ring, right, then I can turn it on, specify which LED I want to turn on, and specify the color. That's all I have to do. Nothing else. I don't have to tell the controller to do, I don't have to like make the controller turn on the specific LED and then, deal with all that code. No, I just tell the controller what color, what LED, and what brightness. That's it. And think back to coding that ultrasonic sensor, right? Think about all that code we wrote in loop just to get distance, right? Wouldn't it be easier if I could just do ultrasonic sensor.getDistance, right? Wouldn't it have been a lot easier instead of doing all that math, learning the physics behind it? Now, obviously, that's important, but again, keep in mind, right? All the code we wrote for that ultrasonic sensor could be condensed into a function that's just getDistance, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So here's the general idea behind coding the NeoPixel, right? You're going to specify which LED you want and the color that you want to set that LED. And then you're going to use the show method to actually light up the LED. Basically, turn it on with the color that you specify. Okay, so let's just put this into practice now. So let's go ahead to Tinkercad. Let's make a new circuit. Okay, it's loading. Okay, let's call this 4.5 circuit. Okay, let's grab an Arduino. We're not going to use a breadboard for this, but let's look up NeoPixel. We're going to get the 12 one. And then we're just going to wire it. All right, so the first one we see here is this ground pin. It's going to go ahead and do that first. I'm just going to sort of just drag that here. Okay, cool. We'll set this to black. Okay, the next one is going to be power, which is just 5 volts. Let's go ahead and do that. Oh, I might be running out of space here. Uh-oh. Okay, Tinkercad did not like that. 1 second. Okay, let's try that again. I ran out of monitor screen. The real estate there. Okay. Yep. Get this to... Oh, it happened again. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's set this to red. And then the last one that we're going to be doing is this input pin. Not the output pin, but this input one. Now, if you're wondering, well, okay, what is this output pin? This is if you wanted to add another NeoPixel. You would connect the output to the next NeoPixel's power ring. So that just allows you to chain them together, basically. So, once again, it's just going to be input. And we're going to want a PWM pin for this. Let's just use pin 11, because that's the one I have nearby. Okay, cool. So, pin 11, ground, let's change the color. We usually use yellow for these kind of things, so yellow is neat and dandy. We got 5 volts, we got ground, we got power. You can start simulation, but nothing will happen. That's exactly what we want. Okay, so now the next part, right, that I mentioned is code, right? So let's go ahead and switch to text. Let's get rid of this pre-generated stuff, which we don't want. Okay. So now you might be wondering, like, okay, how do I tell my code that I'm going to be using this fancy library, like that I'm going to be using this library to help me write out my code, right? How do I tell it that? Well, if you hit this button here, that kind of looks like a, what is this, a drawer? Yeah, I guess so. If you ever heard, it says libraries. And if you go down, you see NeoPixel. This is for controlling NeoPixel LEDs. Now, if you're really if you really want to, look into the specifics of things, you can click this link. And it'll tell you exactly how everything works. Obviously, I'm going to be doing that in this video, but this goes into more detail. Okay, so we're going to include this, and immediately at the top, we see include Adafruit NeoPixel. Okay, and this is a library that's going to allow us to actually write the code in an easy manner, all right? We don't have to think too much about writing it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is define the input pin, right? So we're going to do hashtag define in pin, we'll do pin 11 because that's the one we specified. And instead of doing any pin modes, what we're going to be doing is creating this light ring object, right? So we're going to initialize it, right? And basically what we're going to be doing at the top of the code is creating this actual light ring object that we're then going to do any setup and all of that light ring object in void setup, all right? So the idea here is it's going to be Adafruit underscore neopixel, right? This is just the name of the library. And then you're going to hit space, and then you're going to type in the name of your neopixel ring, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it light ring. Equals, and then when you type in this equals in code, it's going to create a new object, all right? And the object that we're going to create is this Adafruit neopixel object, all right? So it's going to be Adafruit underscore neopixel, and then we have parentheses, and then we're going to hit that semicolon. Now these parentheses do in fact take in some arguments, all right? And by arguments I mean you have to pass things in, because you have to tell this library that, hey, you know, what kind of neopixel are you going to be working with, all right? So the first thing you're going to type in is the number of LEDs, which is 12, okay? Then you're going to type in your input pin, right? You want to tell it what pin you're using. And then this next argument, don't worry so much about it, but this is going to allow us to control it at an RGB level. So you're going to type in neo underscore GRB plus neo underscore KHZ 800. And this is going to basically allow you to control it at an RGB level, okay? Cool. So, again, here's the idea, right? We defined the pin, and then we created the light ring here. Now we're going to set it up, right? So the first thing you're going to want to do is begin the light ring, okay? This is basically telling it, hey, I want to start lighting stuff up, all right? Now, that's basically all you need to do in setup. It's just basically tell the light ring, hey, I'm ready to get things set up, and I'm ready to start showing some patterns on my light ring. Okay. So, the next thing that I want to show you, right, is just controlling each individual pixel. So the way you do one pixel, right, is it's going to be light ring dot set pixel color. Notice how easy that is, right? And I'm going to turn on pixel 0, right? So the first thing you put in is the number. And then we need a color, so it's going to be light ring dot color, and then 255 0 0. So now take some time to think about what color this might be, right? And so this is how you put in the color for RGB, by the way, in the library when you call set pixel color. So it's going to be light ring dot color, okay? And why light ring? Well, why do we have to use this? Well, because we're controlling this based on an RGB perspective, right? So you have to specify what kind of color object we're going to be using. Now, if I start simulation, looks like we have an issue. Oh, looks like I have a typo. Adafruit neopixel. Oh, this needs to be a capital P. I apologize. Okay, let's start again. Okay, cool. We see nothing happens. And you're like, okay, well, what's going on, right? Like, I set the pixel color. I said I wanted to turn on the 0th pixel, right? So that's going to be like the first one. We'll find out exactly what that first one is in a second. And I specified the color. Like, what the heck? What's happening? Well, we forgot a line of code. And the thing we forgot, remember, stop simulation in order to edit your code. The thing we forgot, right, is that we need to actually turn on the LED. So in order to do that, it's just lightring.show. That's it. You're basically going to show whatever you set the color to before, all right? And there we go. So this is pixel 0, or rather LED 0. And yeah, that's turning it on to be red. That's pretty much it. So I can do other colors and I can do other pixels, right? So let's make pixel 1 green and let's make pixel 2 blue, right? So it's just light ring dot set pixel color 1 and then light ring dot color 0 255 0. Now if I start simulation, we have red and green. Now the thing to keep in mind about show, right, is that you don't need a show for every single call that you make to set pixel color. The one show call, so basically what's happening, right, is you set the pixel color. So the pixels know, okay, I want to be this color. Then you have to tell the actual LED, or the light ring rather, to say, okay, you have all these colors set up on all the pixels, now actually show them. And that's what this is doing. It's showing whatever you've set. In this case, we've only set 2 pixels, right? So we're showing the 2 pixels whose color that we've set. And then it's just going to be, once again, light ring dot set pixel color. And then we're going to do 2, and then light ring dot color, and then 0, 0, 255. So this is going to be blue on pixel 2. And there we go. We have red, green, and blue. Okay, so that's sort of the basic way of using this NeoPixel ring. Now I want to show you a more creative way of going about it, okay? So let's say I have a situation where I want to, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the code comments in front of these so I can remove them from code, but I'll still leave it there just in case if you want to reference it. Again, remember, comments, they are not a part of code, right? So they're not going to count. What I want to do is I want to create something called a function, right? And this function is basically going to take in a color, take in the number of LEDs that I have, and then turn on all of the NeoPixels at that color, okay? So the way you write a function, right? First of all, the way you have to think about it is, what is a function doing? That's the first thing you have to think about, right? So in this case, the only thing that the function is doing is turning on the LED strip, which means that when I call this function, right, when I actually use this function inside loop, I'm not expecting to get anything back, right? Like, this function isn't returning anything to me. It's not giving anything back. It's just doing something for me, right? So in that case, when you're not expected to get anything like a number back from your function, you type void, okay? And then you give the name of your function. So we're going to do light all. That's going to be the name of our function. And then you have open and close parentheses, and then you have your bracket, and then close your bracket. So it's going to look like this. Now, we want this function to take in the number of LEDs. Well, and now in order to do that, we're going to use the ability to take in a parameter, right? So here, this is a function, right? But this is just a part of a library, so we don't see it. But we're going to do the exact same idea that this has, right? We're going to use this setup in our own code, right? So notice, this set pixel color has 2 parameters. The pixel that you want to light up, and then the color. Well, we want to do something similar, but we want to take in the number of LEDs and then the color that we want, right? So in this case, right, it's going to be auto, which is just a fancy keyword. Don't worry too much about that, but usually all the variables you want to use, you tend to preface them with auto. It's going to be auto num LEDs and then auto color. So we can take in the number of LEDs and we can take in the color. Now, we want to be able to turn all of these LEDs on. So the one way you could do it is just be like, okay, let's just copy this line of code, paste it 12 times, and we're done, right? Another way is we can use something called a for loop. And this is basically going to handle doing this set pixel color for us multiple times. So here's the idea, right? And I'll explain it in a second. So we're going to do for, and then open and close parentheses, and then open and close curly brackets, okay? Now inside this argument, right, we're going to type in auto I equals 0, I is less than num LEDs, I plus plus. So now what this is going to do, right, is it's going to start this loop with this counter I equal to 0. So we're going to start at I equals 0, right? 0, then we're going to run code in loop, right? So inside these curly brackets here, we're going to run the code that sets the specific color. Then this I plus plus means that I is going to increment by 1. So then I equals 1, run code in loop. And then I equals 2, we're going to run code in loop. And then this is going to repeat until I is less than the number of LEDs. So what is the number of LEDs? Well, we know that it's 12, right? So when I is less than 12, which means that this is going to stop at I equals 11, right? Because after I equals 11, it's going to do I plus plus, and then we're going to get 12, but is 12 less than 12? No, right? So the idea behind the for loop, right, is you have this starting condition, right? We're going to have this counter, I equals 0. Then you have this truth value, right? Is the number I less than your number of LEDs that you've passed in? In this case, it's not, right? Because I equals 0. And then after you run everything in the loop, it's going to run this incrementer, where it's going to say, hey, increment I by 1. Now you might be wondering, well, okay, what's the relevance between 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 11, right? Well, it's pretty straightforward, right? Because we have 12 pixels, right? which are numbered from 0 to 11. So if we loop through all of this, then all I have to do is just set the LED color and write the code for that once, and then this loop will take care of that for me, right? So here's what I mean, right? So we're going to do lightRing.setPixelColor. Now remember, the first argument is what pixel we're using, right? And the pixel we're using is going to be I, right? Because I is the number of pixels that we're going to be iterating across. We're going to be looping through the number of pixels from 0 to 11, right? So, for example, it's going to be lightRing.setPixelColor. I starts at 0, it's going to be 0. Then it's going to increment. Then we're at 1, right? Is 1 less than 12? Yes, so we're good to run the code. So it's going to be then setPixelColor 1. Then we're going to repeat again, right? We're going to increment I, we're going to get 2. Is 2 less than 12? Yes, so we can run the code in our block. So we're going to set the pixel color. We're going to set pixel 2 in this case, or LED 2, right? Then we're going to repeat again. I is 3, 4, 5, etc. It keeps repeating until we get to 11, right? So run code in loop. Let me write this here, then stop. Okay, so we're going to keep repeating, and it's going to be I, and then color, because we passed in the color here. That's it. So just with 3 lines of code, I can set LED colors for 12 LEDs, right? So again, keep in mind this for loop idea, right? We start at some number, we go all the way up to another number, and then we increment, right? We add 1 to that number each time, right? And that adding 1 allows us to change the color of these, change which LED that we're working with, right? So once we've set all the LED colors, right? So this for loop is set all of the LED colors. The next thing we're going to do is actually turn on the light ring to show the color. So it's just going to be lightRing.show. Okay, so now, right, if I wanted to use this, all I need to do is type in light all, and then there's 12 LEDs, and let's say I wanted to light them all red. So it's going to be lightRing.color 25500. And this is going to do all of this. So instead of copying all of this code and putting it in loop, I can just make this function that'll do it for me. And so instead of doing all this complicated code, I have this easy to read code called light all that I just use here. And I understand what it's doing because the function name is clear. Light all of the pixels on the NeoPixel, right? So that's the idea. So if I hit start, let's see. Oh, capital C. I keep forgetting my capitals today. There we go. There we go. All of them are red, right? So let's backtrack and think through this again. We're going to call this function. This function has a name light all, okay, that I defined down here. This function takes in 2 things. It takes in the number of LEDs and the color that I want to light my LED, all right? Now I have this function, right? Here are my 2 arguments defined, right? The first one's the number of LEDs. The second one's the color. Then I'm going to loop through all the LEDs and set the color, right? And in the loop, I start at the number I start at the number 0, right? And this number is represented with the variable I. And then I go all the way up to the number of LEDs, and then I increment, right? So I'm going to start at 0, and then is 0 less than 12? That's the question we have to ask. Yes, then cool, I can run the code in my loop. Then I set the 0th pixel to red, and then I increment, right? I run this. This is going to increment I by 1. So now I is 1. Is 1 less than 12? Yes. So then I can run and set the first pixel to red, right? Then I increment, right? I run this, and then I get 2. Is 2 less than 12? Yes. So then I light the second pixel to red. Then I increment. 2 becomes 3. Is 3 less than 12? Yes. So then I light the third pixel. Then I do the same thing for the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, all the way up to the 11th. And then when we're at the 11th pixel, right, we light up pixel 11. Then we do I++. We get 12. Is 12 less than 12? No, 12 equals 12, right? So this loop stops, right? We break out of it and go to this next slide of code where we turn on the light ring to show the color, right? So now it's on, okay? Now, there's one more thing I want to show you that will explain, hopefully, really, the difference between the show and the set pixel color if you're still a little bit confused. So let's define a new function that's going to do something similar. Except the only thing but notice that like when I turn on my LEDs, right, they all turn on at the same time, right? But what if I wanted to turn on one at a time, kind of in a staggered pattern, right? So let's explore how you could do that. So let's find a new function called light all staggered. We're going to be taking the same thing, the number of LEDs and the color that we want to work with, okay? Now, what I want to do is loop through the LEDs again, right? So for auto, let's get some tabling here. For auto, I equals 0, I is less than num LEDs, I plus plus, right? Just a standard loop. And then I am going to set the pixel color, okay? Going to be I and then color, right? The same idea as what we did over here, but I'm going to immediately call show. So think about what's going to happen, right? I'm going to set the pixel color like 0, then I'm going to show it, and then I'm going to go again, right? So what's going to happen is let's start at 0, right? So I'm going to set the 0th pixel to a particular color, and then I'm going to immediately show it. So the 0th pixel is going to light up. Then I'm going to do the first pixel. I'm going to set the first pixel to, let's say, red. Then I'm going to show it. So now we have the 0th pixel and then the first pixel. Then I do the second one. Then the second one appears. And the third one. Then the fourth one. So instead of turning them all at once, it's going to do it staggered. Now, for loops and this code, because it runs every 20 milliseconds, right? It's going to happen a lot faster than we think. So you might not actually see it. So in order to actually see it, we're just going to add a delay of 100 milliseconds, okay? This makes sure that, okay, instead of immediately going to the next one, right, instead of immediately incrementing and, say, going from I equals 0 to I equals 1, we're going to wait 100 milliseconds, and then we're going to do it, right? So if I change this to light all staggered, right, which is, again, it's allowed because this is the same, this takes in the same arguments, right? Notice what'll happen. Oh, did I hit that? Uh-oh, what's going on? Something's not right. I'll change this to light all. Okay, that works. Let's see. How do I equals 0? I is less than num LEDs. I plus plus. We're going to set the pixel color to I and color. We're going to show and then delay 100. Okay, let me type it in manually. Maybe it's freaking out. It's going to be 12. And then light ring dot color with a capital C. 25500. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I just have to manually type it out. So let me change the delay to like 500 to make it more clear. So here's what's going to happen, right? First LED on, and then we wait. That was too fast. Hold on. Let's do like 1,000. So, watch. On, 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 and then the pattern continues, right? So we set the color, show the color. Set the color, show. Set, show. Wait. Set, show, set, show, set, show, right? So that's kind of the difference, right? Here, we're going to show the pixel the second we set the color, right? But here we set all the colors first and then we show it, right? So that's the difference, right? This one is going to turn them all at once because we set all of the colors first and then we turn it on. This one is going to set the color and then turn it on. So it's going to happen every second, basically, right? It's setting the color, showing the color, right? So you can see that here. Set, show. Set the color, show the color. Set the color, show the color, right? And that continuously repeats until we turn all of them on, all right? So that wraps up my lesson on NeoPixel LEDs. I think the big thing to keep in mind, right, if major takeaways, if you don't really understand what's happening, is first of all, remember, we have to make the light ring object, right? Then we have to begin it, right? This is basically the equivalent of setup, right? But it's just for that controller that's on the LED, right? So then after, right, we set each individual color, right? And this uses the RGB spectrum to set the color. And then after, we made these functions, which are basically just these ways of including blocks of code elsewhere. It makes our code nicer and easier to read, right? Because notice, I only have to call light all staggered instead of typing all of this code out, right? I just called this function, which is easier to read, right? We made these functions that turned on all of the LEDs for us. Now, there's a difference between setting the pixel color and showing the pixel color. One will just set the color without actually turning it on, and then the other just turns it on. You also should keep in mind the notation used for loops, right? And what happens in each stage of a for loop. So we set a variable equal to 0, let's say, then we increment it, and then we also continuously check whether or not we've exceeded a certain value. In this case, it's num LEDs, all right? If you don't really understand the code side of this, I highly recommend watching a video that you can find anywhere on YouTube on for loops. They might do a better job of explaining it than I did since I'm explaining all of this in the Arduino context. you might find it better to be explained in a normal code context. So feel free to watch those, but other than that, that wraps up this lesson, and I'll see you in the next section.